Hello, my name is Tosca Bruno van Vijveken and I direct the Transnational NGO Leadership Institute that is part of the TNGO initiative. A couple of years ago we launched a leadership preparedness program geared towards transnational NGO leaders who currently work at the second tier of responsibility in their organizations and who wish to prepare themselves individually for a transition to a top level position eventually. And today I'm undertaking a brief interview with Roland, and now I'm probably going to not pronounce your name right. Is it Angerer?
Angerer.
Angerer. The Regional Director for the Americas of Plan International, and you're based in Panama, as I understand it,
That's
right?
right.
And you're a participant in the Transnational NGO Leadership Institute, which is why we're interviewing you today. So thank you for allowing us to interview you.
Pleasure.
So Plan International, broadly speaking, what is the nature and mission, and how would you characterize the nature of the work in the Americas?
Well, Plan International is one of the biggest child rights organizations, one of the biggest and oldest, about 75 years old, have transformed a lot over those period of time, but are still sticking to our fundamental mission, which is being a sponsorship organization, establishing emotional bonds between people who sponsor or give money for children, and on the other hand, attending to children and families who should benefit from our programs. We work in 70 countries, 12 of which are in Latin America, Caribbean, Central America, and I'm the regional director overseeing programs in these 12 areas.
I see.
We do focus on a concept which we call child-centered community development.
Yeah.
It puts the child in the center of a process where we analyze the guarantee of child rights at community level, but also at higher political levels. And we try to engage the children themselves, but also their families and community organizations to actually put in place sustainable guarantee systems so that children's rights can be guaranteed into the future.
I see. And would you say that the nature of that overall mission is expressed in any or articulated in any particular way for the Americas because of the nature of the region, or is that not necessarily the case?
That's not the case. We have a pretty stable global mission, the global approach to development. What happens is we have a programmatic guide or an orientation how to work, which is comprised of 8 thematic areas we're trying to address, and those are a little bit different in different regions. And in the region of the Americas, we clearly see that the area of child protection becomes more and more important because violence against children is one of the major problems we're facing.
I see.
Violence which starts actually in the homes, children being abused by their parents or being punished in schools, exposed to violence from their peers. Bullying is one of the big issues and very kind of hidden issues which only has come to light in the last 2-3 years. And this for us is actually the basis, the unfortunate negative basis for the social violence we find in many Latin American countries, particularly in Central America in the last 10 to 15 years.
Oh, I see. That is an interesting element for that region. How did you as an individual become involved in what I will just call transnational activism? And tell me how your leadership in Plan International came about or grew over time.
Okay, that's a question which has to go a little bit back in time because I have been in that business for 25 years now. And actually my interest came out of a trip which I did as a student to Latin America, and where I experienced that huge inequity or that huge distance which exists between rich and poor. And I came back and thought, why is it that people who live in such rich countries and rich environments are so poor? And that triggered a lot of studies in my university times. And then I started working in development straight when I came from university. First in campaigning and advocacy work in my own country, which is Austria. And then I joined United Nations, UNDP concretely, in going to Central America, starting as junior professional officer, managing interventions and projects. Then went to Southern Africa with an Austrian NGO, managing a group of development workers who were working for partner organizations for a limited period of time. And from there I joined Plan, and that Plan engagement started at a relatively high level of management as country director in Colombia.
I see.
Colombia being a pretty tough place at that point in time. Security was a big issue. Operations on the ground always exposed to dangers from guerrilla, from paramilitary groups, and a big challenge actually, and also a big learning opportunity, how to actually manage in an environment where you are under threat.
Right. Including physical threat.
Physical threat and also political threat. There were all sorts of discourse against NGOs who were human rights oriented, and though we were not being seen so much as advocacy organization, we always expressed solidarity with these NGOs, because we said, okay, we cannot let any government divide us or divide the civil society movement into the good ones and the bad ones. From there I moved on to India, which is actually the biggest country program Plan has in its portfolio. And what I had started already in Colombia, that was transforming the dependent franchise organization into a locally registered NGO. I continued in India because they had started that before. And in India I could conclude that process to actually transform Plan India into a member organization of Plan International. And that was the reason why I left after 4 years, because everything was ready to be handed over to this local Indian partner, a new Indian member organization.
And that's how you came into this position?
That then I was upgraded, so to say, and I became regional director for Latin America. Again, with a brief or with an orientation to continue that process. I think particularly Latin America is a region where donors are pulling out. Bilateral donors are actually we are reducing all over the place. Also individual donors are asking more and more questions. Why should we give money to countries like Brazil or Colombia, which are growing, which have now a role in global economy? But we see the inequity, we see the poverty which is still there in pockets, we see huge numbers of excluded populations, girls, indigenous, Afro-descendant populations. And we say, okay, but if there is wealth in a country, we need to address that and build that bridge, which for many decades we've built between North and South. Now we have to build it within the country.
Within the country, right. And so do you feel, and I don't want to put you on the spot in this regard, but you attended our institute that is whose curriculum is framed around the image of a leadership leap. So the next leap from second tier of responsibility, the way you have it in a large federated structure like Plan, to some top level position wherever that is. Tell us more about how you're preparing for that leap, if you will, in various ways, not just by being here, but in other ways.
I mean, as a regional director, one is in a sort of a sandwich position. So you get pressure from the country operations where things really happen, and you get pressure from the central organizations where policies are being made. And you have to implement it either way, or to push back and say, well, okay, that's what countries tell me, it doesn't work. So I'm kind of more and more integrated into that global process of decision making, and I see an interesting way for me to say, okay, well, I want to be part of actually making those policy decisions, or this wider strategic and visionary decisions or discussions where this organization should be going. And I think after managing a lot of operations at different levels, I think leading, which I learned in the course definitely is a different thing, is a challenging and an exciting task I see in front of myself in my career. And I think I would like to make that leap from a manager to a leader.
I see. Interesting. So you've already kind of answered what was going to be my next question, more or less, which is, what is distinct, you think, about leading, and especially leading at a top level versus the level that you're in now? But if there's something more you want to elaborate on, then please.
Yeah, the difference is obviously to let go from a number of detailed exposure to what is happening at the activity level or at the output level of our work. Towards the embedding of an organization into a wider social context. which I touched upon a little bit with that question of how do we react to these changes in middle income countries where wealth is being created, middle class is coming up, which should have a responsibility towards child rights in their own countries. So what's the role of an organization in that context? That's definitely a leadership question, I would say. And bringing that up to a global level and the question, what role do we play and what relevance do we have as a big international NGO in the future? Where do the challenges come from? What do we have to let go? Where do we have to adjust ourselves to the 21st century in terms of information technologies, etc.? Those are questions which pop up now and then, but I've never had the chance to really get my teeth into them.
Yes.
I think as in a leadership position, you will be much more in discussions and debates with probably peers and with external entities like universities, where you can actually shape and frame the path, the longer term path of that organization.
I think you described that really well. What do you hope to gain from attending this institute?
For me, the important thing is to actually step back from the day-to-day work, where you often kind of bogged down in a number of very detailed activities, and you have hardly time, more than 15 minutes, to stay on the same task because you're being interrupted, you have some other priorities to do. So to step back and reflect on practice, and to do that in a context of a frame theoretical base, where you can say, okay, there were some thinkers or people with experience who came up with an analysis of what we're actually doing, and confront that practical experience with these theoretical frames. And in a way, this is very enriching, because sometimes these theoretical frames fit very well with what I've experienced, and sometimes they don't. And in both cases, it's actually interesting to see why. No? So even if the frame doesn't fit, it doesn't mean it's a worthless exercise. It's still very interesting to see, okay, well, why does it not fit, or how could it be improved to actually make it better, describing what we're trying to do.
I see. Interesting. I want to jump back to Plan for a moment. This is my next but last question is, so what is Plan doing, not just globally, but also maybe more importantly for this interview at the regional level, to prepare for leadership succession and transition at a couple of levels? What does it do explicitly in order to arrange for transition and succession?
We have, in the last 2 years, we have started to develop a talent management program, which is actually pegged at 3 levels, if you want to say so. There is kind of the middle management preparation, where people from country levels or working in countries should become managers in their own country. The second level would be, how do we make those national managers international managers to become country directors in a different country. And the third level is actually where I probably come in. How do country directors or regional directors become global directors or leaders of the organization? We have already done, now in the second round for this middle level, but we have just started this top level, a senior leadership high talent program, or whatever they call it.
I see.
So I'm looking forward to get into that and to see what the organization is offering for this jump or this leap from manager to leader.
I see. And so this, you said this started only a few years ago, this more explicit pipeline or talent management system or process.
Sorry, not just to complement what the organization does, is usually if you get into a new position, which goes through a competitive selection process, you get in these higher levels usually a coaching process attached. So when I became regional director, for the first 6 months, I had a coach with whom I could work through all the problems, the teething problems and the startup problems in the new function.
That's a wonderful service that not too many leaders have access to in our sector, at least.
It's very helpful.
Yeah. So my last question is, this is only at the end of day 2 of the institute. So it's probably too early to ask you, but I'll do it anyway because I have a chance to interview you now and not later in the week. Can you just tell me examples of 1 or 2 lessons or insights you've gained from the institute that have been relevant to you in a certain way?
I like the variety of people around the table. It's very good to see, and I said that yesterday in the meeting, that more and more people from southern countries are participating, and obviously there is a civil society growing, which we want to see in the end, and those people are coming into these functions and positions, and it's very good to exchange with them to see where their problems are and what their framing of the situation is, which might be different, or that turns out in the discussions they are different than ours are. And on the other hand, I see kind of this new generation of leaders coming up and compare them with the older generation where I'm almost belong to, but also the older traditional NGOs who have a different way of thinking and working.
Is Plan an example?
As Plan is an example, and we have Save the Children, we have Oxfam, we have others around the table. And I clearly see there is a new way of approaching things, and I think as older or traditional NGOs, we have to actually face that new thinking which comes up in the new ways of working. Otherwise, we become irrelevant, or we become dinosaurs who will be gone in 15, 20 years' time.
That's a really provocative way of ending this interview. I want to thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.